Would you like to join us up here in front? Welcome to the first Benjamin Rush Society event at University of Pennsylvania. And I'm going to make a very brief introduction. I'm Beth Haynes. I'm the Executive Director of Benjamin Rush. And we are an organization that is interested in promoting ideas to protect the doctor-patient relationship and have that free of government interference. And that opens up a lot of wide variety of topics to discuss. We have lectures that students present at the medical schools, and we also have a series of debates. And this is our fifth and final for this academic year. We have an unusual setup tonight where we have 3 people arguing in opposition to the resolution, and we have 2 people that are arguing in defense of this. So we've had to alter the standard order of how people argue. Normally the affirmative goes first, but in order to stagger everyone, so we could have every other, instead of stacking up 2 people together, we're actually going to have the opposition speak first. The reason we have this unusual balance is that since we didn't initially have a Benjamin Rush chapter at UPenn, it took us about 3 months before we were able to actually find a venue for the debate in Philadelphia. And this ended up giving us about 6 weeks in order to invite speakers. And because of that, a lot of the speakers that we invited had already had previous engagements. We tried to invite quite a few top-level people at the American Board of Internal Medicine, at the American Board of Medical Societies, and at the last minute we tried to get people on the board for the American Board of Anesthesiologists. But, like I said, we asked them pretty late, and there was a huge event going on in Chicago that many of them are attending. So, trying to get people to fit in, I ended up asking one of our debaters. I sent out a kind of an all-points call of, I need some debaters, and I got the response from Dr. Jha saying that he would be glad to do this if we needed somebody to fill in. I had him on hold, and then we got another person that came up and said he would do it, but I still had invitations out to the ABA, waiting to hear from them, and I didn't want to say no to the 2 people that stepped up. And we already had Dr. Levine say that he would argue in opposition. So rather than turn down these people who had offered to prepare, I decided, well, let's figure out a way to just include them all. And the other interesting thing is there's more, it's not like there's really just 2 sides to this, and I hope that becomes very clear to you as these debaters go. There's not really 2 sides, there's many points of view about this particular topic. And what we want to do with Benjamin Rush is try to clarify the issues so that people have a better understanding of them. The idea is that once people understand the issues better, it's a place to begin to try and move forward so we can find some common ground. So although we've set it up in something where it comes across as a contentious situation, it's more to spark the thinking, challenge people to really present the absolute best case that they possibly can, as if it's a fight, but the end result is what we want is to find a place that we can all move forward together. So I'm hoping that tonight we'll have vigorous civil debate, and that we will keep this in the spirit of moving things forward, that's really our goal. So with that, I'm going to let Perry come and introduce the debaters and our moderator, and we will move forward. Oh, and I'm going to be sitting in the front row with you guys, and I'll have 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 30 seconds, stop, so that you'll be able to come up. And if you come up here to speak for at least your opening statements, then I think that'll be more comfortable. And then when we get to the rebuttals and the discussion, you can stay at the table.
Hello, thank you for coming to the University of Pennsylvania to hear this debate. My name is Perry Evangelista. I'm a fourth-year medical student here at Penn, and I have the honor of introducing to you our panel debaters. So arguing in favor, we have Dr. Paul Kempen. Dr. Kempen graduated from the University of Michigan with a major in biology. He then received his medical degree from Albert Ludwigs University in West Germany, which was founded in 1457. From there, he went on to pursue his residency training in anesthesiology at Christ Krankenhaus in Germany. He then came back to the United States and completed a pediatric and internal medicine internship at Kalamazoo and entered a second anesthesiology residency at the University of Michigan. He completed his PhD several years later with a thesis titled Study of Transorally Placed Gastric and Esophageal Defibrillation Electrodes in a Canine Model. Dr. Kempen is American Board Certified in Anesthesiology, Parts 1 and 2, and has his maintenance of certification from the ABA. He currently practices anesthesiology at the Cleveland Clinic. Second, arguing in favor, is Andrew Schlafly. Andy Schlafly is a general counsel for the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, which has defended private medicine for 70 years. He has litigated high-profile cases such as the AAPS versus the Texas Medical Board, the precedent-setting case that put medical board officials on trial based on the equal protection and due process clauses and the First Amendment. Mr. Schlafly has given numerous presentations at medical conferences and schools. He has filed many friend-of-the-art court briefs, most recently in defense of patents for DNA before the U.S. Supreme Court, and several of his briefs have been cited by Supreme Court justices and appellate courts. He graduated magna cum laude from Harvard Law School, where he was an editor of the Harvard Law Review along with Barack Obama, and holds a BSc degree in engineering from Princeton University. Arguing the opposed, we have Dr. Martin Levine. Dr. Levine is a distinguished fellow of the American College of Osteopathic Family Physicians. Dr. Levine has a family practice in Bayonne, New Jersey, and Jersey City, New Jersey. He serves as the Associate Dean for Educational Development, Professor of Family Medicine, and Professor of Osteopathic Manipulative Treatment at the Touro College of Osteopathic Medicine in Harlem. Dr. Levine also serves as the Discipline Chief of Family Medicine and Associate Professor of Clinical Family Medicine at the University of New England College of Osteopathic Medicine, New Jersey Clinical Campus, based at Seton Hall University. Dr. Levine has served on the AOA's Board of Trustees since 2000. In addition to his role on the board, he served the AOA in a number of capacities, including chair of the Department of Affiliate Relations and the Department of Professional Affairs, as well as the chair of the Bureau of Clinical Education and Research. Dr. Levine is past president of the New Jersey Association of Osteopathic Physicians and Surgeons. He also served numerous committees for the American College of Osteopathic Family Physicians and the American Academy of Osteopathy. He has served as the sports medicine physician for the New York City and Boston marathons and has been a team physician for all levels of sports, including the Olympics, professional teams, college teams, and high school teams. After earning his osteopathic medical degree from what is now the Kirksville College of Osteopathic Medicine at Still University, Dr. Levine completed his internship and residency training at Kennedy Memorial Hospital in Stratford, New Jersey, where he served as the chief resident. Also arguing opposed is Dr. Mitchell Heller. Dr. Heller graduated from Brandeis University with a degree in biology, pursued graduate coursework in computer science at MIT, and went on to receive his medical degree from Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. After medical school, Dr. Heller became a resident in emergency medicine at New York University Bellevue Hospital Center. He is currently an attending physician at JFK Medical Center in the Department of Emergency Medicine in Edison, New Jersey. Dr. Heller is board certified and a member of the American Academy of Emergency Medicine, American College of Emergency Physicians, has worked as a volunteer physician at the U.S. Open Tennis Tournament, and a medical team leader at Woodstock 1999. Also arguing the opposed is Sarab Jha. Dr. Jha completed his medical education at Guy's Hospital in London. After dabbling in surgery for a few years, he came to Philadelphia for more predictable weather and excellent training in radiology. He is assistant professor of radiology at the University of Pennsylvania, specializing in cardiovascular imaging. His scholarly interest pertains to health policy, specifically the value of imaging. He describes himself as a reluctant capitalist, and his favorite book in economics is Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy by Joseph Schumpeter. And finally, we have our moderator, Dr. Goldfarb. Dr. Goldfarb is a graduate of Princeton University and the University of Rochester School of Medicine, is a nephrologist and professor of medicine and associate dean for curriculum at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania, right here. Dr. Goldfarb has served as the program director of the NIH-sponsored General Clinical Research Center at Penn and was the interim chair of the Department of Medicine at Penn for 2.5 years. He also served on the ABIM subspecialty board on nephrology and has been a board member of the Regents of the American College of Physicians. He is a member of the American Society of Clinical Investigation, and he currently serves as the 61st president of the College of Physicians of Philadelphia. He has been the recipient of many awards, including the Laureate Award from the Pennsylvania chapter of the American College of Physicians and the Christian and Mary Lindback Award for distinguished teaching from Penn. Dr. Goldfarb has over 100 original publications and has edited 2 books. He served on the editorial board for the Journal of Clinical Investigation, American Journal of Kidney Disease, Diabetes, Journal of American Society of Nephrology, Clinical Nephrology, and is the current editor-in-chief of NephSAP, an official journal of the American Society of Nephrology. So, have a great debate.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'd like to ask if we could have a moment of silence for the horrible events in Boston and the brave work of the first responders and to memorialize those poor people who were hurt and died in that terrible event. So let's just take a moment. Thank you very much. I too came to this debate a little late, and I think it's a very interesting topic. As you heard, I've sort of been on various sides of the maintenance of certification issue, having worked on the American Board of Internal Medicine's nephrology board when this idea really first started, at least for internal medicine, about needing for certification. On the other hand, I'm grandfathered because I had my board certification at a time when it was unlimited timing, so I have an interest perhaps in not having all of these requirements. But on the other hand, you know, I'm a two-handed doctor. On the other hand, the journal that I edit is actually used for maintenance of certification by nephrologists. So I certainly understand some of the issues and have participated in them. What we're going to do is I'm going to sort of set the stage a little bit more than perhaps I would need to, because we're not having the affirmative begin, but rather the opposition for the reasons that Beth mentioned. So let me say that I think I'll just read it. The proposition is, be it resolved, maintenance of certification requirements fail to improve the quality of medical care while placing unnecessary burdens on physicians. So personally, I don't think the issue so much is whether people need to keep up and people need to maintain their knowledge of their fields, and physicians need to maintain their capacity to deliver the best medical care. I think it's a little bit of a question of how one goes about doing that and what sort of requirements are in place. And also it speaks to the nature of quality. And I think the maintenance of certification process has mostly has been mostly a process rather than an outcome-based approach. The outcomes that have been used up until this point have been the results of an exam, and now we're starting to see some outcomes based on individuals' practice activities and how well they interact with patients, their record keeping, their ability to show that their patients are achieving some of the goals that their fields have laid out for them. And so I think there's plenty of room for debate here, certainly, about what's the proper way to do this. Just to reiterate the whole issue about the civility of this, I once had the privilege of having dinner with Harold Shapiro, who was the president of Princeton, and then, or previous to that, president of the University of Michigan, one of the great public intellectuals in the country. And he said, you know, a discussion is when there's the possibility that you'll change your mind. So I hope everyone here in the audience will enter into this whole discussion with the idea that your mind might be changed about what you think about this topic. So without any further ado, let me begin by asking for our first speaker, who will represent, again, the opposition to this resolution that maintenance of certification requirements fail to improve the quality of medical care while placing unnecessary burdens on physicians. And I think Dr. Jean is going to be the first speaker. Now, he's going to have 7 minutes. I'm sorry, I should just say, he's going to have 7 minutes. We're going to then go back and forth, alternating between the opposition and those speaking for the proposition. And then we'll have a chance for rebuttal, again, alternating. And then we'll have some time for the audience to ask questions, and we'll moderate that part of the debate. And then we will, and that'll be fairly brief. I'm going to ask you not to give speeches, but to ask specific questions. You'll have 30 seconds to ask your question. And then after that, we'll do a vote, and I think we'll probably do a vote by raising our hands, right? Okay. All right. So first, Dr. John.
Thank you, Dr. Goldfarb, and thank you, Dr. Haynes, for the opportunity to talk at this occasion. As is customary, I should have some disclosures. Firstly, I am not a member of the American Board of Medical Specialties that deals with maintenance certification. I'm also not a communist, so you can rest assured about that. I have another disclosure, and that is very important for me to make, which is I think maintenance of certification is an unnecessary burden, an unwarranted assault for me. For the rest of the physicians, I think it's perfectly legitimate. And you can say that I suffer from the Lake Wobegon effect, which is I think that I'm above average. Surely my brilliance is self-evident. And the problem with doctors who think that they're above average is not simply that many doctors think they're above average, is because it's very difficult to discern between what we know about ourselves and what we think others ought to know about us. Now, economists have a term for this. It's called asymmetric information. Thank God for economists, because you could just as well call this head in the clouds. And unless we assume that the word doctor ought to have a Pavlovian response of deference, and I can tell you that it no longer gets you an upgrade on British Airways, then it begs the question, upon whom is the burden to prove their competence? Is it upon Mrs. Smith and Mr. Patel to demonstrate that I have kept up to date with the radiology literature, or is it upon me to demonstrate to them that I have? And I don't think there will be much disagreement that it is the latter, because it would be very unbecoming of our profession to assume otherwise. And once we agree to that, and it's hard not to agree to that, because if we don't agree to that, we are basically questioning licensure. We're questioning medical school. We're questioning the very basis of signaling and information. Then it is no longer a matter of principle that maintenance certification is required. It is a matter of quibbling about the price. And the price, the burden that we feel, I would argue, is appropriate, just about. Now, I'm a diagnostic radiologist, and I can tell you one thing, and it's a useful thing to take from that, is that when you're considering anything from the veil of uncertainty, you have to decide what your level of type 1 and type 2 error is. Now, let me paraphrase that. Well, by that I mean, what is the level you're going to set at which you're going to let a bad doctor escape? So let me modify a legal maxim over here. Is it better, let's consider two scenarios. Scenario A, that 10 good physicians, 10 competent physicians, spend an extra 6 hours on Saturday laboring their maintenance of certificate requirement. Is it better that that happens than one bad physician escapes? Or, scenario 2, that 10 bad physicians escape rather than one good physician spends 6 hours on a Sunday for maintenance certification? From the veil of uncertainty, I doubt anyone would argue that the second scenario would be better than the first. We want to catch the bad apple. We want to check the thresholds so low that the frequency of the bad apple is minimal, if not non-existent. And this in itself is a very difficult concept to grasp, and I find it very difficult to grasp. Let me give you an example, an anecdote from my own personal experience. I was a resident in emergency medicine in the UK, and I went up to my consultant and I said to him, you know what? Every case of appendicitis that I refer to the surgeon ends up having appendicitis. And he looked at me at horror and he said, My God, how many cases have you missed? The problem is redundancy is good. False positives are good. If we are saying that maintenance certification is unnecessary, that is good. It means we're doing the right job because we're not missing a large number of bad apples. Now, let alone the fact that if you see a physician that says, this regulatory mandate, that's necessary, you're really talking to a bureaucrat, I would say that any attempt at granularity could be counterproductive. Why? Well, let me ask you this. How many bad doctors does it take to ruin a profession? That's a rhetorical question, because I asked in the plural. It's a singular, one. It takes one. And perhaps unbeknownst to many here, that the most prolific serial killer in history happened to be a general practitioner from North England, Dr. Harold Shipman. And he gave his patients a rather liberal dose of diamorphine, resulting in their death. Now, you may say that maintenance certification would not have caught him. Fair enough. You may say that the problem wasn't that he didn't know the right dose of diamorphine. In fact, he did know the right dose of diamorphine. Fair enough. The problem is when he comes out and the media get hold, the first thing they're going to ask is, these doctors, what are they doing for self-policing? And that's exactly what happened when he came out. And guess what they found? These doctors with certification, what are they doing for self-policing? Nada. Zero. And then you have all hue and cry breakout. Now, we're in a very privileged position. Now, I'm not going to come out with the same sanctimonious stuff that we should know by heart. Yes, we deal with sick people. We're a very noble profession. Why are we privileged? We are privileged because we have a monopoly. We control the supply of physicians. We don't have to worry about some MBA from Bain Consulting telling us, oh, by the way, you know what? Rajiv from Bangalore can do his job at 1/10 of the price. We are a monopoly. We don't play by the rules of the free market. Is there a catch? There is always a catch. What's the catch? To paraphrase Uncle Ben from Spider-Man, with self-policing comes great responsibility. And the responsibility is to make sure that we make the process burdensome, irksome, tiring for the profession, so that we do not miss a bad apple amongst us. And if a serial killer emerges, we can stand with our head held in dignity that no stone was left unturned. Thank you.
Very good, right on time. Next, we're going to have for the proposition, Dr. Kempen, right? Or
No, I'm not going
Mr. Schlafly.
Thanks to all of you for being here. It's a good turnout, and this is an important issue, particularly for the medical students. As you become physicians, you will be surprised at how there's a private organization that has no accountability to the general medical population or the general public. Will make these demands on your time, hundreds of hours, thousands of dollars, that you have to comply with, or else bad things will happen. You'll get kicked off the hospital staff. You may get kicked off the insurance, or where they're headed with this, you may not be able to renew your medical license. In the legal profession, our obligation is 12 hours of continuing legal education a year, which in New York, you can take it online. There are no exams, there's no travel, there are no tests, there's nothing else. There's no chance of failure. There's no labeling an attorney as someone who's not board certified if he doesn't jump through all these hoops. 12 hours a year. In the medical profession, 50 hours of CME. But that has nothing to do with maintenance of certification. Maintenance certification is hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars of stress by an unaccountable organization. They're not elected. They're not really self-policing because they're not representative of the medical profession. Their exams are not published. They will jealously guard the questions that are asked in their exams. And I've spoken to physicians who say they're absurd questions which are asked on the exams. Now, we have a doctor shortage in this country. The average doctor has time to spend only 7 minutes with a patient. Half the counties in the United States do not have a single OBGYN. Half the physicians in Massachusetts, primary care physicians, are not taking new patients. There's a long wait in Massachusetts just to see a doctor. There's a tremendous shortage of doctors' time. And amid that shortage, what are these private, unaccountable organizations doing in demanding hundreds of hours of doctors' time that takes them away from patient care? Now, you may think, well, it's not going to take the doctor's time away from patient care. Doctors should spend some of their free time preparing for these exams, these difficult maintenance of certification exams. Well, doctors don't have much free time. The medical students here in the audience, when you get out there as a medical professional, you will see free time is not what you have. In fact, there have been studies that have been done that amid all the good news about becoming a doctor and how the medical license is the most valuable license in existence. It's worth maybe $10 million on average. What you don't have is time. And other studies show that the lifespan of a physician is actually shorter than the lifespan of other professions. The rate of suicide of physicians is actually higher than the rate of suicide of other professions. It's a very stressful occupation that you're going into. There are all sorts of checks and balances on doctors, and the prior talk said we've got to make sure we don't have bad doctors. You've got medical boards breathing down your neck. You've got hospitals who will do peer review on you. You've got insurance companies. You've got malpractice attorneys. All right, the attorneys who only have an obligation of only 12 hours a year for continuing legal education, they have the time to sue you, and they will sue you. And if there's a bad doctor out there, you can count on an army of malpractice attorneys being on that bad doctor's back and suing him left and right. Why do we need, on top of all this, an additional layer of stress on a physician called maintenance of certification? Do we have maintenance of certification for other things in life? Do I have to be recertified to be a husband? Do we have to be recertified every year to have our driver's license? No, every 5 or 10 years we get our picture retaken. Do you have to recertify your college degree? Do you have to recertify your medical degree? No, as a professional, once we go through the college education, we get our graduate degree, we are a professional now, and we have the responsibility to decide how to allocate our time. So why does this maintenance certification exist? It's all about the money. It's a money-making scheme. And you can look on the internet and pull up the Form 990s for these groups that are making these demands for recertification, as I did this morning. And I saw that if you look at the leading ones here, American Board of Internal Medicine pulled in $46 million in 2010 with its recertification requirements. The American Board of Medical Specialties pulled in $13 million for itself. There are 24 of these organizations that are pulling in big money, maybe as much as $1 billion in requiring these exams and programs. And they're paying themselves big salaries. You look at Kevin Weiss, an executive at the American Board of Medical Specialties, supposedly a nonprofit organization that's supposedly self-policing the medical profession. He took in compensation in 2011 of $562,000. That's pretty nice for requiring people to take tests. James Puffer, American Board of Family Medicine executive, 2011, he took in $727,000 as an annual salary. Christine Cassell, American Board of Internal Medicine, she took in for herself $794,000 as an annual salary. There's big money at this, and it's getting worse. Because what you may not hear from the supporters of maintenance certification tonight, but they're pushing to get it tied into licensure. Because people wouldn't do this voluntarily. Doctors would not take out so much time away from patients voluntarily to take some test of dubious significance unless they're required to do it. And these organizations are pushing to require it. They already require it of hospitals. Hospitals are kicking doctors off their staff if they're not recertified, and they're pushing to require it even of your medical licensure. Thank you.
Okay, the gauntlets have been thrown. I must say, when I went on the website of the Oxford Union to see about debating and just to sort of get some of the rules, because I wasn't familiar with them, the first thing you come up there is a debate that they had with Kermit the Frog. So, I'm not sure what that says about what we're doing, but, but it was quite interesting. Okay, the next speaker, again for the opposition now, is Dr. Levine, and there's a slight difference in timing that we have here. The opposition has 6 minutes.
If it does, Ron, you're in the wrong group. You blew that. Too much, not enough money for you in compensation. Ron was the head of our Bureau of Osteopathic Specialties, which is the osteopathic equivalent of the ABMS, and he headed that very admirably for several years. With that as an introduction of myself, I guess I'll start. Well, I'm glad that Mr. Schlafly compared doctors with lawyers, because I think we've won if that's his only great argument. So thanks, I appreciate that. Lawyers can't get jobs right now. Have you seen that? They're all coming out and they can't get anywhere. How many students and residents are here right now? Raise your hand. Raise them high. Come on, come on, come on, come on. All right, how many of you expect to sit for, keep them up. How many of you still expect to sit for certification exams when you finish your residency? So everybody left their hand up. How many physicians in the room? Just keep your hands up, students. How many physicians in the room? How many of you expected or are certified now? So there are a few that aren't certified now. Is that true? Interesting. Interesting. So it's not a question of certification, but a question here today of maintenance of certification. And as we heard earlier, if your time is from a past like mine, 30 years ago I sat for my boards, and I don't really have to take the recertification, but this whole new maintenance of certification will kick in. I think that's interesting for us also. But it's really about one major point, and that is the protection of the public, period. Your patients. And because there's data that suggests that physicians who are certified provide better care, and there are physicians that are recertified that provide better care, that's why we're here today. Because state boards of medical examiners and the FSMB, Federation of State Boards of Medical Examiners, who are meeting up in Boston as we speak, have found that the physicians that are certified and then recertified are less likely to come before them with problems. All kinds of problems. And those of you that are students that have been out on rotations in 3rd and 4th year, professionalism, resource-based education. Do you know how to get what you need done for your patient? That's the questions you're being graded on now when you're going on rotations. That's what you're being graded on. Medical knowledge? Yeah, okay, medical knowledge. That's where it is. But if you can't use this, then you're of no value. Because nobody here, I don't care what specialty you're in, knows everything about your own specialty. And you're going to be graded on that. So how do we find that out? It's very simple. Not simple, really. But we measure patient outcomes. How well are your patients doing? And as was stated earlier by my colleague, we don't know what we don't know about our patients and how well we're providing care to them. And when we look at that across the board, we find that there is a tremendous dichotomy between some physicians and others. A major weak link. What's interesting about in the osteopathic profession, what we're calling osteopathic continuous certification, that there's one component difference in recertification, or as we used to call it, and now maintenance of certification, or osteopathic continuous certification, and that's the part that's called practice performance assessment and improvement. And you engage in continuous improvement through comparing your own patient outcomes with others. Who are the others? Well, there's been many out there all along. National Quality Forum came out with many evidence-based guidelines. We also have the the NCQA. We also have others. But the point is, how well do you practice medicine compared to your others? How well do you treat your diabetics? Are your LDLs, your blood pressures, your hemoglobin A1Cs controlled? At what percentage? And get this, we also put into place whether or not your patients are compliant. If they miss their appointments, you're held to a different standard because we've measured it and we've published data on it. So let's look at that data. That data tells us that our patients do better because those physicians participating in our clinical assessment program get performance improvement. Once they see where they are and how well controlled their patients are, and they get reminded about the fact that they have to ask, did you have your foot exam? Did you have your dilated retinal exam? Did you have your other evidence-based guidelines that suggest that your patients with diabetes will do better? You get reminded of it more, and then you use it more, and actually your patients have better outcomes. Isn't that what you want? Do you want that or not? That's the only question that we're up against here. And get this, just so happens that I've been reporting all of my data for the past 5 years through the CMS's Physician Quality Reporting System, which is really identical to what we're using for Osteopathic Continuous Certification. Do you know how I get my data uploaded? I make a medical student do it. It took the medical student 45 minutes to extrapolate, to take my data from 20 patient charts and put it up on the web page. If I had an electronic, I'm in the middle of changing my stuff, and the electronic data point didn't work, and we all know how bad that kind of stuff is. But the key is that that student was able to put my data into that data registry, held up there by CMS in 45 minutes for those 20 charts. I got my report back. I did a module that said, this is what we expect in diabetes. I did them again 6 months later, and guess what? My performance improved. My patients are getting better care. Burdensome? I also got reimbursed from Medicare $9,000 for doing that on the 2% margin for my Medicare patients for that year. So, how much of a burden is $9,000? I liked it.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Dr. Kempen, right? Thank you, sir.
Well, it's nice that Dr. Levine has medical students to do that. Family practitioners out in the middle of Ohio do not. They work very hard. They have a hard life out there. And for them to participate in many of these, quote, educational programs, they have to travel up to Toledo, leave their practice empty, or hire someone to cover them, which is not typical for hospital-employed physicians, like Dr. Levine possibly is. It's about lifelong education, or is it about lifelong testing? I think MOOC, or Maintenance of Certification, is about testing. Are we testing textbooks? I mean, he held up his cell phone, he said, there's the data. I think lifelong education means reading your journals, pursuing that which you do. I know ENT surgeons, they only do this, or this, or this. At the Cleveland Clinic, subspecialization is the key. By doing what you do well, you become very good at it, and you will maintain your specific knowledge and expertise in that field. There are 168 different board certifications. How can that be equal for everyone? How can that be equally meaningful? I question that. Are we going to have people with multiple certifications? Anesthesia does 5 different certificates. How can we maintain the multiple? I could be an ICU certificate, I could be a general anesthesia certificate, I could be a cardiac anesthesiologist. Who has time to maintain multiple certifications when you're working 50 hours a week? We know that residents, your education has been restricted so that you have time to take a breath, to see your wife, to talk to your child. We've gone back from the 90-hour work week, I think, to the 80-hour work week. Well, physicians in general practice in downstate Ohio, they work 24/7, and they're stuck in that town taking care of their patients. And for them to take these modules or travel to Toledo, hiring someone to cover their practice is not an insignificant amount of money. The cost of board certification may be $10,000 in 10 years. In my case, it's more like 16. But then you have to hire someone to cover you. There's a time lost from your vacation. They want me to do this during my vacation. Well, I don't get the 10 weeks vacation that some people may have who work on hospitals as professors of their department. A colleague of mine, Dr. Miser from Ohio State University, said back in '99, if physicians would read 2 articles per day out of 6 million medical articles published annually, in 1 year, they would fall 82 centuries behind in their reading. Well, you can't know it all, that's for sure. You defer, you refer, or you retire. And I think physicians work very hard. We come from the cream of the crop. We work hard to maintain our skills. What we do well, and we do that for our patients. And if we're leaving town to do modules for the sake of bean counters who have to have data to check off, so the federal government is happy with us as physicians because they can document it, that's not patient care. That doesn't benefit a patient or a physician. I have never in my life, in 30 years of practice, been asked if I'm board certified by a patient. The time you will be asked if you're board certified is when you apply for that next job. It's a marketing thing. GACAH certifies hospitals. Hospitals like to say all our doctors are board certified. How wonderful we are. It's a good housekeeping seal of approval with one difference. If that thing you bought with the seal of approval goes bad, you get your money back. Patients don't get their money back. There's a concept in economics, known as regulatory capture. Regulatory capture occurs when special interests co-opt policymakers or political bodies, i.e. regulatory agencies in particular, to further their own ends. The boards say it's voluntary, you don't have to do it, but the Federation of State Medical Boards has a policy of maintenance of licensure. They came to Ohio as the first state. The first year I went around telling people about it, they thought I was crazy. When they heard this was going to be reality, 15,000 physicians in Ohio came together, went to Columbus, and told the state medical board, this will not fly. You cannot make us do this. It's not appropriate. It's a waste of money, waste of time. It's a waste, period. MOC is an evolution. What will it become? For the past 30 years, the ABMS has been trying to make the people like myself who have grandfathered lifelong certificates do this. And they've had a heck of a time. Even the people in charge of the ABMS, the CEO, Dr. Nora, certified in '87 and never since. She's not in MOC, but she's the top dog in the ABMS. The FSMB, the federation, the chairman there, Dr. Chowdhury, he certified once. He's a DO, and he has never been in MOC, but then we're just introducing MOC for the DOs now. So perhaps he may join that, but he's gone a long time without doing any maintenance of certification. He's certified with the ABMS, by the way. There's a recent article that was published by Dr. Buscemi. He went through and looked at the ABIM, the various task force, the Annals editorial physicians on the boards, and he looked through 161 licenses and found that recertification in general medicine occurred at 9% of these leaders, these grandfathers, people with lifelong certificates. If it's worth doing with a lifelong certificate. I have a lifelong certificate. I recertified in 2005 because it seemed like a good idea. That's what the university was telling me to do. And since then, I've maintained my maintenance of certification, but I know in 2015, when it runs out, I'm not going to do it again. And many grandfathers, when they hit that border, if they're required to do it, they're simply going to retire. And there aren't enough physicians. How can that benefit patients if you're taking doctors out of the equation? What are we doing? We're hiring nurse anesthetists, nurse practitioners, PAs. They are going to be the new doctors. That is the future of Obamacare. But we're going to make doctors do even more and have even higher exaltation of their diplomas or whatever while we pass off medical care to non-physicians. It just boggles the mind. The components of the MOC, we have simulation in anesthesia. Never been documented to be anything better than a teaching exercise for people learning a new technique. If you start doing like the pilots exercising for rare events, that probably will never happen. By the time the event comes, you won't be doing it. ACLS has taught us that the manual skills of ACLS disappear after 6 to 8 months. Thank you very much.
Okay, the last speaker for the opposition before we get the rebuttals is Dr. Heller.
Good evening, all. The proposition is that the maintenance of certification requirements fail to improve the quality of medical care while placing an unnecessary burden on physicians. I'm going to argue that the first part of the resolution, that maintenance of certification fails to improve the quality of medical care, is, from the physician's point of view, irrelevant to any discussion of board certification or maintenance of it. And that the second part, that maintenance places an unnecessary burden on physicians, given the voluntary nature of board certification, at least as it is so far, just doesn't make sense. So let's take the second part first. Maintenance of certification places an unnecessary burden on physicians. How many of you here feel that your being here is placing an unnecessary burden on you? No, you're all here voluntarily. Don't let the disguise fool you. I'm a board-certified emergency physician, and I participate in maintenance of certification. Why did I do that? Well, as Mr. Schlafly said before, it's all about the money. I'll be frank. I obtained board certification because more jobs are available to me as a board-certified physician than as one who isn't board-certified. And many of the jobs that are available pay more if you're board-certified. It's as simple as that. I'm not going to argue any kind of silly stuff about I did it because I want patients to get better medical care. I'm in charge of that, not the board. Now, medical licensing is a government-enforced guild. As a matter of fact, the AMA created medical licensing specifically for the purpose of increasing the incomes of physicians. And board certification is kind of a guild within a guild. Once physicians were all licensed in about 1900, the AMA wasn't satisfied. They went on to decrease the number of medical schools, and then boards began to help physicians prevent competition from other physicians. The first boards, actually, you'd be surprised to learn, were dermatology, ENT and ophtho, which was a combined board, and OBGYN. It's pretty clear that this wasn't because they wanted to improve quality, but they wanted to differentiate themselves from all the other practitioners. And by doing so, they thought they would get more business than the other practitioners. If I ever perceived that my board certification was more trouble than it was worth, what would I do? I'd drop it. I would cease to maintain my board certification. It's not an unnecessary burden. It's a profitable one for me. Is it expensive and time-consuming and difficult? Yeah. Would I rather it was cheaper and easier? Sure. It's somewhat burdensome. It's become more burdensome because of medical regulation and bureaucracy, as others have alluded to. And as the subsidization, as government payments for medical care, and as the third-party payer system grows, these excess funds that flow into medicine create more bureaucracy and thus more demand for board certification and maintenance of certification. The medical bureaucracy grows alongside it. But that's just how it is. Is a Caribbean vacation at the Ritz-Carlton expensive and the travel getting there expensive, time-consuming? Sure. I'd rather it was cheaper and I'd rather it took less time to get to the Caribbean. But I go because it's worth it. And so is board certification. The fact that we wish desirable ends to be less costly, that doesn't mean that those ends are unnecessary burdens. The fact that we wish some things we purchase were less costly than they are doesn't mean we didn't exercise our free will to purchase them, because we perceive that the benefits exceeded their costs. Now, as I said, I want to argue the second part, that the failure to improve quality of medical care is a non sequitur. As I said, we don't become board certified to, in the abstract, improve the quality of medical care. We do it for our own personal interests. The idea of quality in this context is a little difficult What is quality? According to the dictionary, it's a degree of excellence or a superiority in kind. So that sort of implies that we can line up physicians and measure their quality or rank them in order of quality. We all know that we can't do that. So what we're really talking about in this quality is something that the bureaucrats can measure. They can check off their boxes. And that, as physicians, as others have implied, is irrelevant. Who cares what the bureaucrats check off? What the patients care about is value. They go to a physician with a specific end in mind. They want to feel better. And they want it at a cost they can afford. So, for instance, a patient with some routine medical problem might feel perfectly adequate going to a kind of middle-of-the-road physician near their house that they could afford. Someone with a more difficult problem might feel it's worth their time to pay more to travel to see a world-renowned expert. Quality is just something on the continuum of patients in seeking value. Let me sum up. As I said at the outset, board certification and maintenance of certification are voluntary activities. We obtain board certification because it's an advantage that we perceive for ourselves. And as long as it remains a voluntary activity, it can't be an unnecessary burden. Anyone who perceives that the costs exceed the advantages are free to drop it and would be well advised to do so.
Okay, so now we've had the arguments laid out, and now it's time for some rebuttal. And I hope that you will focus on trying to rebut the arguments that have been laid out by your opponents. So first, we're going to start with those for the affirmative, and you will have 5 minutes.
Oh, were they from the podium or from you?
No, well, come up here, yes.
Yes, thank you. There's this concept that maintenance of certification is somehow effective. The ABMS sponsored a study in 2002. It was co-authored by the Associate Vice President and the Executive Vice President of the ABMS. And I will quote that they concluded that less than 5% of all prior studies attempting to demonstrate the value of board certification used research methods inappropriate for the research question itself. The remaining studies were additionally not qualitatively amenable to support actual meta-analysis. And the problem with this is there is no proof. Associations really don't mean anything in a scientific basis. We are in the state of outcome-based study, and there is no proof. Night follows day, life precedes death, but they're not associated. They are associated, but they don't cause each other. So we need validation of this concept if we are going to pay $350 million a year, or what the ABMS and affiliates consume. We have $2.5 billion a year in continuing medical education. And in this age of internet, where you can get online from that office on the border to Kentucky and gain and acquire information, the beauty of my job at the Cleveland Clinic is I have every journal available to man on my computer for my resources. And I don't read 2 articles a day. I probably read 10 to 20. So I'm always consuming knowledge, and that's what everyone in this room should be doing for the rest of their lives. Who do you need to prove it to? You need to prove it to yourself. Every patient is a test, and when you successfully treat patients, you successfully pass the test. We do not need private corporations coming out of the woods, the ABMS and the affiliates, telling us what we need to do to meet their standard, their general standard. Patients are individuals. We need to go in on the individuality of the patient, not on the general check off the box. This is the protocol, the guideline, the theory of progression that is made for nurses and less educated individuals. And this is another quote from the ABMS. Fact, ABMS recognizes that regardless of the profession, whether it's healthcare, law enforcement, education, or accounting, there is no certification that guarantees performance or positive outcomes. I have looked through the Medical Board of Ohio at the causes for actions against physicians. Overwhelmingly, impairment is 45%. That's drug and alcohol impairment. All other things brought together is 24%, criminal acts 17, and bootstraps, that's the next door state says, we have a problem with this guy, so that's bootstrapped into the state of Ohio. I looked and I found only one example in the year 2011 about a physician being incompetent, and when you look at the matter up close, he left the state, said, I'm not going to bother with Ohio, and is practicing neurosurgery in the state of New York. In Ohio, they pride themselves in being able to prosecute the most physicians per 1,000 licenses, and it's one of the most severe in the country at 5.8. And they prosecute physicians for nothing that has to do with competence. So why pay all this money to maintain competency validation? Yes, maintain competence for you in your practice. There's a couple testimonials. There's several other ABMS individuals, the presidents of various component societies. Dr. Wachter is the ABIM. He recertified after 25 years for the first time. And recertify, the truth is, I had to. As a member of the ABIM Board of Directors, I'm required to participate in MOC as a condition of my service. This is not personal conviction, it's money. As for the MOC components, I'd like to mention the practice improvement modules. One that's always put out there is glucose tolerance, keeping the glucose where it should be. But if we recognize that the Nuremberg statutes of 1947 were developed because doctors were doing things to patients without their permission, that is exactly what a practice improvement module is. You're going to make them pay for the drugs, you're going to tell them this is what you should be doing, and I'm doing it for my board certification, for personal gain. This was outlawed after the Nazis went down in 47. They'll call it a practice improvement module because you don't publish this data. Somehow, suddenly, it doesn't really matter. It matters to me. If my friend John gets his sugar so low that he goes off the highway at 80 miles an hour and hits a tree and dies, I think that makes a real impact. CME has been there. The AMA PRA was started in the 60s, causing a program for physicians to maintain their education. It's been there. They give awards. It's not anything new. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. John for rebuttal.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I don't think I need to work hard to persuade you that if the precondition of our employment is explicit demonstration of improved outcomes by a randomized controlled trial, then there should be a mass outbreak of resignation of doctors. There simply aren't randomized controlled trials demonstrating maintenance of certification, just as there are not randomized controlled trials demonstrating the usefulness of medical school versus nursing school, just as there are no randomized controlled trials demonstrating the usefulness of making Raji from Bangalore go through 6 years of residency again, despite his medical training. I hope I can convince you that use of that outcome purity data is somewhat selective if we use MOC against the imprecision and the fog of that measurement. But I want to make a few other points that my worthy opponents made earlier on. The first is the doctor shortage. Well, that's very easy. The American Medical Association simply needs to let medical schools, let there be a proliferation. I don't think we'll find that very palatable. Just double the number of physicians. You'll have a few unemployed ones, but you'll solve the doctor shortage. Hands up. Who's going to come and march with me to Washington to lobby for that to happen? I don't think I'll see many volunteers for that. The other very interesting point made was the financial gain. Now, I do think that there are certain things that are like boomerang. You throw them and they come back at you. And as physicians, we have to be very careful if we say that financial gain from an activity automatically disqualifies the value of that activity. Really? So MSc loses its utility just because a designer gains from its implementation. So chemotherapy loses its utility just because oncologists gain from its implementation. We have to be very careful about that argument because we can be hoisted by our own petard there. So I don't think that that in itself is an argument that should be made or made loud enough by us physicians. Money-making scheme. Well, let's put aside the money-making scheme. Let's talk about uncertainty. Why do we certify? To reduce uncertainty. And this is best illustrated by an anecdote. Have you ever been lost in the middle of nowhere with an angry wife and 2 yelling kids at 2 a.m.? I have. It was in the middle of nowhere. And after a series of motels that looked like Norman Bates Motel, I finally came across Holiday Inn Express. I'll let you know, I don't like Holiday Inn. I think it sucks. But it was a brand name, and I knew that I wasn't going to get stabbed in the shower. And that's the thing. Brand names are important. If we do not do these MOCs, you think it's going to go away? No, there'll be 20 different credit agencies. There'll be 20 different hospitals. Physicians will not have to say 1 exam, but 20 exams. Thank God for a monopoly. Yes, have your $700,000, but don't make me sit 20 exams. I mean, you don't need to look into the future with the former governor of Alaska having that look in her eye saying, how's that working out for you? Free market and all the credit agencies. I'll tell you what, it won't work out very well. Let's thank our stars in the position that we are, that we have one rating agency, us. Let's keep it that way without putting it to the wolves of the free market. Thank you.
Mr. Schlafly?
We do have one rating agency. It's called the Medical Board, the State Medical Board. And many of you in this audience, unfortunately, will one day get a letter from the State Medical Board saying, we're looking into your license. And you will lose sleep at night. You will be terrified by that because the State Medical Board has the power to pull your license away. But with the State Medical Board, we get certain rights. We get rights of due process. We get protection against discrimination. We get the ability to get freedom of information requests against the medical board. They're accountable to the political process. So there are some safeguards for that terrifying moment when the license that you just spent hundreds of thousands of dollars getting, there's safeguards against someone arbitrarily pulling it away from you. Those safeguards do not exist with this maintenance of certification. They're private groups. They're not accountable to the political process. They're not accountable to freedom of information requests. There's no guarantee that they're doing this in a non-discriminatory fashion. And that is scary. And it is not voluntary. You've been told here that it's voluntary. Get it if you want. Don't get it if you don't want to. I'm here because there was a doctor who runs a charity clinic in New Jersey who was on the medical staff at Somerset Hospital, and they kicked him off the medical staff because he did not recertify. Good doctor by all measures. Never had a malpractice judgment against him. Loved by his patients. Runs a charity clinic. But because he was not recertified, the hospital kicked him off the staff. And that's going on all around the country. And because of that, his patients no longer have access to him at that hospital. So if his patients are taken by ambulance to Somerset Hospital in New Jersey, and they ask for this doctor, hospital says, sorry, this doctor does not have privileges at this hospital, so he can't see you here. That's a denial of access by patients to a doctor. And one of the earlier speakers said what patients care about is quality. They care about quality, but they care most about access, being able to have access to their doctor at a hospital. And that's disappearing all around the country, partly because of these maintenance of recertification requirements. We disagree on a lot of issues. Doctors are very divided on many political issues. This is one issue where all surveys come out with something like 96% of doctors saying they oppose this MOC, maintenance of certification. It is one of the most one-sided survey results you can see on any issue, where the doctors who have gone through it, and I realize many in the audience haven't gone through this yet, but the doctors who have gone through it, 96% say it's nonsense, it's a waste of time, it's burdensome. This has destroyed some physicians' careers. The ABIM sued Sarah Von Mueller because after one of these exams, she commented on what the test questions were to one of these test prep houses, Aurora. The American Board of Internal Medicine sued Sarah Von Mueller and got a judgment against her for about $82,000, and then went after her for ABIM's legal fees, which was something like $370,000. Completely destroyed her. as a professional. That's what happens when you get this sort of money-making incentive that mixes into this issue. It's something that needs to be stopped. It's something that needs to be opposed by physicians. Physicians need to stand up against this. There's a saying that I'm sure many of the doctors in this room have heard. What do you call the doctor who graduated last in his medical class? You call him doctor. You make it through the process of medical school, you get your license, you are now a professional and you are not subjected to the whim of an arbitrary organization that has no accountability to the public. You are your own professional to make your own decisions about what is good for the patient. And if there's some defect in the process, let's look at medical school, but it works pretty well. In fact, it works very well and we need more doctors. And as professionals, we do not subject ourselves to nameless, non-transparent organizations to tell the public whether we're a good professional or not. We have our license as professionals. We hold ourselves out. People will come to us if they want our services, and maintenance of certification needs to be eliminated. Thank you.
Dr. Levine or Dr. Heller? Dr. Heller is going to go? Okay.
I'm going to be brief. I pretty much said my part here. But, you know, some of this hinges on whether it's voluntary or not to be certified. And as long as the licensure scheme is not tied, it's clearly voluntary. As long as physicians feel that it's going to be an advantage for them, they will continue to be certified. And if there is no advantage, they can drop it. Yes, we work in an environment that's heavily regulated, and there are a great deal of incentives to maintain board certification. But that's different than saying that you can't, that it's coerced. As I said earlier, there's a lot of things we'd like to be easier and cheaper, but if it's worth having, then you do it, and if it's not worth having, then you don't. And it's really as simple as that. To the extent that it's coerced, it's sort of a cage of our own making, and the history of medical licensure is one that was advocated by the AMA and achieved by the AMA by political process, and board certification is entirely voluntary. Now, in terms of the cost shifts, it's true, it's becoming more expensive. As I explained, it's because the bureaucratization shifts costs away from physicians and towards the organizations. And this is a fight that's going to be ongoing. It's an economic fight. It's not a moral fight. It's simply who's going to get the excess money that's out there. And the boards do make a lot of money, and the bureaucracy enables that. I have a question, well, they probably don't have an opportunity to rebut this, but who is this argument with? Are you arguing for a government action to prevent maintenance of certification? Are you arguing for the boards to give up what they're doing, to take a different path? The argument is really with ourselves. This is a cage, to the extent it's a cage of our own making. And when we walk away from it, it will disappear. Thank you.
Who are we arguing with? We're arguing with the bureaucrats, with the government, with 12 guys in a boardroom telling all anesthesiologists what they need to do to be a good doctor to meet their needs. That's not the way this country was founded. We have constitutional rights, we vote, we have democracy. There is no vote from the physicians saying what this should be. It's all coming down from on high, from academic centers, people who don't practice medicine to a great degree. Many of them have 5-hour work weeks, and the rest of the time they're the chairman of the department, and they like to see everyone meet their expectations. I think that's a significant problem. The other issue is board certification. Go for it. Prove it to yourself. Show yourself you can do it, but then it should be good for life. Board certified is by its very nature past tense. I'm board certified twice, and I'm going to be board certified for the rest of my life. If I do MOC or if MOL comes along, I'll just go teach high school, because I think it's a constitutional problem that we have to stand up and protect the profession and the patients. Because if we're pushing people out the door because they're old and they said it's not worth it anymore, I'm going to go teach high school, count me in. Now, the government has issued The ABMS went to the Congress and lobbied Congress. You know, they're a nonprofit organization, but they can still lobby if they want to a certain degree. And they got the government to pass the PQRS MOC, the 2% that we heard mentioned here earlier. It started off as a payment, and as of 2014, it's going to be a penalty. So if you're not in MOOC, get ready to not take the money or have it taken from you. Well, maybe if Medicare and Medicaid are going the route I think they're going, this will just be another open invitation for physicians to say, excuse me, hell no. I'm just going to go cash. I'm not going to worry about it. The government, who's going to take care of these people? Down there on the border to Kentucky, the doctors that are there. We can have regional standards and we can have national standards. And if our national standards do not look at the region and say, you need doctors, how are you going to get them? Well, they're board certified. They're going up to Columbus to work for the university. That's a problem. Milton Friedman was an economist. He wrote, the pressure on the legislature to license an occupation rarely comes from the members of the public. On the contrary, the pressure invariably comes from the occupation itself. We want to limit the number of doctors. And now I just heard at the Ohio State meeting 2 weeks ago, 1,000 medical students did not match in the match and did not scramble in the scramble. The new stepping point into being a doctor is, can you get a residency position? Because if you don't get a residency position, you'll never be a doctor, because most states require at least 1 year of residency training. The government's not going to pay for this. I'm going to get my care from some nurse practitioner when I retire, because that's probably all that's going to be left if we keep raising the level of requirements on physicians to the point where they cannot compete financially with the cheaper Obamacare. Now, there's a Choosing Wisely program being put out by the American Board of Internal Medicine. The crazy part about it is they're saying if we quit doing unnecessary testing, we will be able to pay for all this health care that Obamacare is bringing towards us. But these are the same people who say we should test every doctor every 8, maybe 5 years would be even better, to find that one guy who might be maybe not so good. And if you look around, the Lake Wobegon effect is there. We're all better than everybody else. So we're happy to see the other guy have a problem. The issue comes back to haunt you when it comes back to haunt you. There is another certifying body, the American Board of Physician Specialists. The ABMS is not the only one. They have sued in court, protecting their market, protecting their brand name. Brand names are important. Watch Pepsi and Coke go at it. Which one's better? Well, they've gone to court and precluded this board certifying agency, which has been around for 50 to 60 years, from being able to compete, particularly in the area of emergency medical physicians. And emergency medical physicians in America today, to a great degree, have grandfathered in, never even did a residency in medicine, but have been darn good providers on the Kentucky border of Ohio. There are articles that come out in the Less is More rubric of the new Archives of Internal Medicine, known as JAM Internal Medicine, and diagnostic tests for symptoms with a low risk of serious illness do little to reassure patients, decrease their anxiety, or resolve their symptoms. Is this certification going to even matter to a patient? I've never been asked. Thank you.
Thanks for this opportunity. I enjoyed the questions and the rhetorical questions, and I don't disagree with actually everything he said, Dr. Kempen. And if I'm not mistaken, you said you were with the Board of Anesthesiology. You're not one of the 12 in the room, were you?
No, I'm board certified twice.
No, but I thought you were on the board. You said earlier you were on one of the boards. You served on the board, so you had to do MOC.
No, I've been an academic physician most of my life, and
So
the university.
Cleveland Clinic
Your
told you to
chairman
do it?
says we should do this, guys.
Oh, all
The
right,
Cleveland
all
Clinic
right.
doesn't require it, by the way.
Oh, okay. I didn't get that. Interesting, the Choosing Wisely program you mentioned. You know, we have come to an understanding that actually MRIs are not needed for most patients with low back pain, and that pain is not a reason to get an MRI. And it's interesting because they put that out there and they said, in all reality, most of the patients with low back pain will get better within 6 weeks if you don't get the MRI, or if you do get the MRI. If you radiate them or you don't radiate them, you treat them any way you want or you never treat them at all. So the question is, Should we be doing that? Should we be doing the MRI? Yes or no? What do you think? Should we be spending the $600 on every MRI? Or should we choose wisely and say, you know, maybe not? Sure, if there are red flags, you better get it. Don't be stupid, but don't be stupid and get it just to get it because of symptoms that don't make sense. You know, these exams certainly have to be psychometrically valid, or they can't exist. I just thought I'd throw that in. There were two articles that I'd like to cite. One is certification and specialization. Do they matter in outcome of acute myocardial infarction? And it was found that certification was one of the reasons that they cited that the physicians, the cardiologists that were taking care of the acute MI patient did say that. Whatever you think of that article is whatever you want. The article cited earlier from 2002, that has recently been updated in actually 2008, not that recently. The association between MOC and examination scores and quality of care. And they used it in a particular way to suggest that there were higher rates of processes of care for Medicare patients. So the question really becomes, do we have the data that suggests that MOC does provide better quality care to our patients? Well, there is some data there that is showing that now. It's not as great as we would like, but in evidence-based medicine, there are certain levels of data. If it's not a level 1, randomized controlled trials, as previously stated, then you go to the next level. And if they're not there, you go to the next level. Well, we're maybe down here right now, but we do have data. You can't ignore the data. You can make a decision based on the data, but the point is, when you look at the evidence, there is data now that suggests that maintenance of certification does provide better care to our patients. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Let me just ask a few questions, and then we'll get the audience involved. Mr. Schlafly, you spoke about the issue of that there are oversight organizations and particularly the malpractice world that is an oversight for physicians and prevents it. But data suggests that most of the cases of medical error are not, in fact, cases that are brought before the courts. And many of the cases that are brought before the courts are, in fact, cases that there's way too much payment associated with them. So is it accurate to say that the malpractice arena is a place where quality really occurs? Because again, it doesn't really capture the problems that have been documented.
Well, many of the cases of medical errors are by hospitals. And hospitals often are not sued the way that doctors are sued. When there's a medical error by a doctor, though, as far as I know, malpractice attorneys are all over that doctor. In fact, malpractice attorneys are such a deterrent to doctors that there's this problem of defensive medicine. It's an over-deterrent that where doctors are practicing medicine defensively and running up costs just because of the fear, the legitimate fear, that the malpractice bar, and I don't do malpractice cases, but I know they're out there, thousands, millions, well, not millions, but hundreds of thousands of attorneys who do nothing but malpractice. And they're out there, every doctor knows it, and they are all over the doctors. The medical errors, many of the medical errors that kill people are made by hospitals, though, and they're not as subjected to suits as doctors are.
Okay. Let me ask those who were for the opposition. We really didn't get into the components of maintenance or certification. Now, we mentioned a little bit about practice improvement modules, but an essential area that I think has evoked most of the concern, I think, from when physicians have been surveyed is the exam. So the question is...
Good, I agree with that.
So now
I will answer that by saying I think we should do away with the recertification exam. And the reason would be that if you demonstrate your competence to practice medicine at a level in your patient's outcomes that exceeds the national norms to a certain high level of acuity, why do you have to sit for an exam as Dr. Kempen said, if he's doing pediatric anesthesiology, why should he sit for, let's say, a general anesthesia board? I agree. But I'm still behind, yes, the idea that you show us your patient outcomes by the evidence-based guidelines that were created typically by your college. Not by your board, but by your college. And that would be the additional piece, as you said, the performance assessment model.
Yeah, so that raises...
I apologize for cutting you off.
No. So that raises another question when you talk about outcomes, because at least in my practice, there are a lot of people that touch that patient besides myself. And so if there's an anesthesiologist that falls down on his or her job, or there's a nurse that forgets to inform someone about the patient's change in vital signs, that could be counted against someone if we have an outcomes-based system, which we all would think is the most important one. So isn't that a dilemma for measuring outcomes and deciding whether someone maintains their certification if it's outcome-based?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we've collected data on when we support the data being uploaded, as I mentioned before, with determinants that made the payers crazy. We looked at this and we said, how well are our diabetics controlled? And it depended upon the kind of insurance. Because Medicare patients were up here, commercial insurance patients were here. Why? Because they had horrible copays for everything they had to do. The next level was Medicaid patients, and then the uninsured, who basically didn't have access to care. When we looked at that, we then extrapolated the data and said, well, what then should we expect of the physician who's treating all of those different types of patients? And to what regard can we say they need to be at a 40% or a 35% control rate if the patient misses 20% of their appointments to the office? So it kind of started looking at that. It's by no means perfect, and I agree that it needs to be developed, because you're right. If I say you have to see the ophthalmologist to that diabetic and get a dilated retinal exam, and they don't do it, why didn't they do it? And we have to hold the insurance companies accountable as well. One of the things that one insurer did was give an increased capitated fee to the physicians participating in that clinical assessment program in the South Jersey, Pennsylvania, Eastern Pennsylvania, and Delaware market.
Okay, let me open it up for the audience. So you have 30 seconds for your question and 1 minute for for the answer. Let's start in the back. Up there, you?
So this is for the opposing side. Several of you have...
Wait to get the mic.
All right.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
No, but they can record it.
Hello? All right. So this question is mainly for the opposing side. Several of you have made the argument, pretty strongly worded, that we believe that maintenance of certification exams lead to better outcomes for patients, and that's why we stand behind that. Why that's a good thing. I know, the right maybe less so, but I think that's a major thrust of the argument. So if we apply the reversal test to that, would the same argument then imply that we should increase certification requirements in order to wring a little more juice out of the orange? Or, if not, how is it that we're just at that perfect right point where it's neither too burdensome nor are we still letting some bad doctors through? And if so, if you believe that we should increase it, how do we know when we're at that right point?
Good, thank you.
Okay, so I'll gladly take your question. I don't think I would make the argument that maintenance certification demonstratively through randomized controlled trials improves outcomes, but neither does medical school, and neither does any other piece of licensure that we employ in medicine to limit the supply to our advantage, for that matter. So if you're going to put maintenance certification against that benchmark, we ought to do it for everything else, including mid-level providers. And as I said earlier on, I can't see people marching in Washington with me for more free market in medicine in that respect, more competition. How do we know that we're at the right level? Precision. There is no precision out here. I think the problem with the way we are facing in medicine and in science in general is that we're seeking precision, and there is no precision to be sought. How do we know? Well, if there is another disaster that comes in, and New York Times gets hold of it, and Fox News gets hold of it, then we're not doing the right thing, and the level of regulatory oversight will be ratcheted up a notch. And if we go through without any significant disasters, then we'll be fine. And there is no sweet spot out there. Doctors will always whine. I whine. I hate the American Board of Radiology with a passion. I hate its chairman. How dare he question what I do on a daily basis? But that's not the point. The point over here is, how is he going to know? How is the person on the street going to know that I've been reviewing the articles that I should be reviewing? From the veil of uncertainty, the only way to do that is to have a certain bar, and in that bar, you have to decide how many people, how many slackers are you going to let go, and that's for you to decide.
All right,
With the public.
Thank you very much. Next question, we'll go over to this side. Yes, sir.
Mostly for the opposed gentleman there. Since medicine has become a team sport, because a lot of people do touch our patients, maintenance of certification does not equate to competency. And if it doesn't, and we certify, and we get through school and residency, and we're tested, and we pass that test and have met a minimum standard, then would you argue that once we are certified, that at least, we tend to forget there was a malpractice crisis, that if you've met the standard and you practice according to the standard, why is there so many malpractice suits in this nation? And would you argue that once you've certified, then you're really protected for malpractice once you've practiced according to those guidelines? And it's kind of like, once you've gone through your education, just one last important point. I spoke to Jim Bajan about this, the head of the federal government, right?
So we're gonna stick with the
We're going to
question.
stop. Yes, let's stop.
So I don't want to take all the questions, but I'll gladly take this one. There aren't very many malpractice suits in India. I can assure you of that. If you're going to conclude from that the doctors in India are doing a better job than the doctors in the United States, that would be an erroneous conclusion. Not 100% erroneous, that would be erroneous. Malpractice suits are as much of a culture of a nation as it is of the level of true error that is occurring. Now, with regards to, once we get the board certification, should it be there for life? Well, there's a difference between driving a car. And by the way, the British license gives you lifelong driver's license. You don't have to renew it. And at least in my profession, in radiology, 25 years ago, someone who passed the driving test had to deal with a stick stiff, or a gear that would be very unsmooth. And now they've got an automatic car with an airbag. I think it's gotten a lot easier. Whereas in radiology, 25 years ago, they looked at an X-ray, gave you two things, and you went home not any wiser. Now you've got a CT scan with God knows how many artifacts. I can say, well, that, by the way, that could be stenosis, that could lead to death, or it could be nothing. Well, that's a little bit of a bandwidth, isn't it, of possibilities. Things have got more complicated. So no, I don't think the two are the same. I don't think board certification confers a unlimited warranty. There is no unlimited warranty. The question is the appropriate level. Is it every year? Is it 10 years? On one hand, we're telling medical students that they should be learning every day rather than bunching up 2 weeks before an exam. What's the harm in us being continually tested? I see no harm in that at all.
Moving ahead, this gentleman with the microphone.
Yes, I've been holding for a while. So. The questions, actually, a statement is one. First gentleman, Dr. Heller, said that getting this mock is basically to gain income. The second gentleman, Dr. Levine, said that getting mock is on the basis of public safety. And then I believe he said that it was on the basis of evidence-based medicine, which I think is a shifting sands. Evidence is always shifting. And then he quoted that it was 1A, 2B, or below that. Well, below 2B is not accepted as a norm. The third gentleman...
So you can have a question here.
Yes, I'm getting
Okay.
to that. And the third gentleman said that the reason for mock is to prevent further regulatory actions against the physician. My question is mock a necessity to determine the knowledge of a physician or not? And the answers from the other side say it is not, and you have not given anything but an anecdote. So would you please take that question?
Well, I don't say that, I just was referencing the article from 2002 with an article from 2005 that said that the physicians that were certified had better patient outcomes. Is that the data you're asking for, or what exactly did you mean by data? I mean, that yes, no? Well, what I suggested was that the physicians who had certification in cardiology had better patient outcomes than the physicians who treated acute MIs who didn't. That's all I said. Whether that is or isn't, that's up to you to decide. That's the literature in this particular instance.
Dr. Kempen?
I have a comment to that. He's referring to Dr. Norsini's study,
Yes,
which
yes,
was
I am.
financed by the ABIM. So if Merck says this drug is good, are we, going to believe it? We have an army of physicians paid by the ABMS and all these boards out there writing articles to support it. People who are opposed stand they're working on patients. They don't have time to do all this. And the Norsini article took family practitioners, cardiologists, and internal medicine docs, lumped them together, certified versus not certified, and demonstrated with a statistical manipulation that certification mattered. But the reality was, if you went to the cardiologist, you had a 3 times better chance of surviving your MI than family practice or internal medicine. So if you're doing apples to oranges or the whole fruit salad, what are you coming up with? And the reality is these studies
By the
are
same
not
token,
scientific.
I was under the impression, and I could be wrong, that the cardiologists who weren't board certified, the family physicians not board certified, and the internists not board certified had worse outcomes than the internist, family practitioner, and cardiologists who were board certified.
Right. They
So-
lumped them together.
So, no. The family practitioners, internists, and cardiologists that were not board certified had worse outcomes than the family practitioner, internist, and cardiologists who were board certified.
But the cardiologists were stellarly
The
better. So when you
cardiologists
have an
were
MI,
better.
go to a cardiologist.
So as you said, if you're in rural Ohio near the Kentucky border, then certainly you may hit the family practitioner's office first. And would you rather have a family physician who is board certified or not? And the answer would
Well,
be
in reality, the
board certified.
patients don't ask those questions.
No, I mean they don't have a choice.
Yes.
Okay.
They don't have a choice.
Let's,
But that family.
And so from the point of view of the patient's point of view, this is all totally irrelevant. Basically it's window dressing around what the real purpose of board certification is, which is to create a guild and to collect rent.
let's go on. Let's get another question. Let's see. Sir here?
Caesar, not to praise him.
There he is.
30 seconds for your question.
As a family physician who treats diabetics in private practice, I'm concerned about pay for performance. I'm concerned about maintenance of licensure because it's all part and parcel of more and more government regulations that eventually you get the Ayn Rand model where you get regulated into a box and you can't do your job any longer. I'm concerned that when I treat a diabetic, of course my goal is normal, a hemoglobin A1C of 5.8, but occasionally you get people that come in without doctors, that come in with a hemoglobin A1C of 12. Right now they want to pay for performance and do maintenance of certification and maintenance of licensure. The current model pays for time with physicians. That is to say, you get paid more to do more work for the patient who's not in as good shape, whereas you would get paid less for the person who's in better shape. If they go with pay for performance, maintenance of certification, maintenance of licensure, there are lots of things that are out of our control. I can tell a patient not to eat a chocolate bar.
So get to the question.
Right. So the question is how can we proceed with a system that has maintenance of certification, pay for performance, and maintenance of licensure, where you're getting paid less to do patients who have more difficult problems, like a hemoglobin A1C of 12, who would be able to take that patient or want to take that patient?
Actually, I sat next to Allison Schwartz and Joe Heck. For those of you who don't know who they are, Allison Schwartz represents, she's a Democrat in Congress, represents some of this area. I think her husband.
She's running for governor, yeah. Her
She's
husband's
now-
a cardiologist.
Philadelphia, Eastern Montgomery County.
Yes, thank you. And then Joe, and then on the Republican side, because it was a bipartisan bill, It was introduced by Joe Heck, actually a DO and an emergency room physician from from Las Vegas, Nevada. And in the bill, it said, pay doctors differently so that you get what you're worth. And they're getting, the bill was going to get rid of the SGR payment system and put into place proper payment for physicians. So those of you that support your osteopathic or allopathic PACs that try to get these things changed, as you just said, please, we welcome you in Washington. Support your associations who are down there. It was American College of Surgeons, American Association of Family Physicians, it was the American College of Physicians, and the American Osteopathic Association. I agree with you. Change the way we pay doctors. Absolutely. Get rid of the SGR.
Be careful what you ask.
Okay, sir, yes. Microphone gets you a question.
You have 5 things. Read the literature.
Okay,
Can you hear
moving
me?
on. Yeah.
Okay. One question for each of the 3 of you. And I'm going to challenge your credibility on each point. Number 1, Dr. John, your entire model of punitiveness, bad apples, I think, from my knowledge, having been on the CME committee of the Philadelphia County Medical Society, is gone. We have the Deming model of CQI, continuing quality improvement.
What's the question for him?
I think he's incorrect in his entire model, and let's see what he has to say in response. Regarding your situation as the head of the AOA, if memory serves, you have to maintain your membership in the AOA in order to maintain your boarded status,
Correct.
which means that you have a punitive hold economically, a purely academic achievement. That's bad. You should have fixed it. For you, thank you. You are basically saying we have freedom of choice, but you're forgetting the punitive component of what everyone is saying in this room. If we have freedom of choice, that's fine. I can decide whether or not I want to be anything. But if the hammer of government regs is on top of me, in terms of licensure, in terms of reimbursement, and so forth, you don't have that freedom any longer, and that's the essence of the entire discussion that you've been evading.
I'm with you. I never said that.
Okay. Would you like
All
to?
choice is constrained by reality. But within that choice,
No, so let him
but
finish.
within
Now let
that
him answer.
choice, you can make an economic decision as to be whether to be board certified or not. Therefore, to argue that it is an unnecessary burden makes no sense.
I have to say that I do love doctors talking about government interference, freedom of choice. I think we lost every single free market leg that we could ever stand on. I read the same book Dr. Kempen read. It was Capitalism and Freedom by Milton Friedman. And when he talked about the Doctors Guild, his exact phrase was retro-regression into the Middle Ages. What did he mean by that? We had no problems creating licensure. We had no problems. Show me the randomized trial that has compared physicians to mid-level providers. None. But when it talks about maintenance certification, all of a sudden, we talk about punitive damage, we talk about time, we talk about government interference. We let the government into our bedrooms, and now we're saying, well, actually, we want a little bit of free market, we want a little bit of government interference, we want you to protect our specialty, we want you to guarantee our payment, but not too much. Who are we? Who do we think we are? Why the special treatment? This is utterly ridiculous. We are like Goldilocks. We want the perfection of everything. A little bit of free market, just enough so that it's still fee for service. A little bit of government, just so that mid-level providers, who we know could do just a good job as us, in the vast majority of the cases, less is more. But no, we don't want to do that. We want their protection. And well, I'll tell you what, when you have their protection, then they'll march in. And when they march in, it is utterly hypocritical of us then to stand up and say, government interference, regulation, monopoly, God's sake. I mean, do we really feel we have a leg to stand on over here? I don't think so.
I agree with Dr. Jha here that this is a cage of our own creation. And to argue otherwise is to say, I want my cake and to have it too. I want to eat my cake and have it too. That you can't have a little bit of regulation. That really, if you want to escape the system, you're going to need to go to a cash-only practice and get away from the bureaucracy.
Dr. Kempen, you want to make?
I'm not going to pretend that I'm responsible for the last 100 years of history. I'm here now. We want reasonable demands upon physicians to allow reasonable care to be delivered to reasonable patients. But the reality is government is in, and we are the only knights in shining armor that can protect the patients from the less is more of tomorrow's government when we all get paid as to how we work, cheap and the same, to do the job the government wants us to do at their bidding and not at the patient's bidding. The patient-physician relationship is medicine, not some bureaucracy that's imposing upon us now. And if we don't stand up now, it will all be lost.
Well, Dr. Kempen, with all due respect, please come with me to Capitol Hill on Wednesday and let's lobby for Rajiv from Bangalore not to require H-1 visas, not to require residency, so that we have a little bit of competition over here, so that doctors lower their prices.
I agree.
Come with me to
Okay, let's stop. Back to the questions.
You didn't answer my question.
Well, I think what you're looking at are a system in which if the membership, which is tied to your CME, and that's the component that they're talking about. You have to have 120 or 150 CME credits in order to be in order to maintain your certification. That's what they're talking about there. So you have to be a member of the organization in order to have your CME credited to you. That's how they're doing it. That's why the tie-in.
And is that
And your specialty
tethering
and your specialty college is saying to you, you need this many credits out of that 120 or 150 within your specialty. That's what that's about.
Otherwise, you're going to take away your
Wait, all right, stop, enough. Yeah, how about some students? You have questions? All right, student, yes, go.
So going back to the issue that was raised about, should we have, it was alluded to very briefly, having multiple board certification organizations and, the litigation trouble that's happened. I guess for both sides, if you could talk a little bit about why or why not. I mean, to some extent, if this one private organization, wants to do MOC, it wouldn't be a problem if there were other accrediting organizations that physicians could go to demonstrate a level of competence in a different way. We have multiple credit rating agencies. We have multiple hospital accrediting agencies, sometimes supplementary, sometimes complementary. So if you could talk a little bit about what that could or couldn't look like in medicine, I think that would be a nice
Medicine
angle.
doesn't want competition, it wants a guild.
No, it's the MOC organizations that don't want competitors. The ABMS is very aggressive in making sure there is not competition for the product that it offers.
Right, because
And that needs to
otherwise
be
there's
looked
no
at.
economic advantage. You lose the economic
Well,
advantage.
they lose the economic advantage, but our job as consumers and standing up for the patients is to point out that that's a monopoly that the ABMS has. They're trying, not only do they have a monopoly, but they're trying to get their way into state-mandated monopoly where the medical boards require you to get certification. It's the most outrageous monopoly of all. They're trying to get the government to mandate the monopoly down the road.
Right, and that's why, that's the only way to maintain the monopoly. That's why it's heading in that direction.
But it's illegal to maintain a monopoly.
Wait.
Unless the government sanctions it.
Dr. John wants to speak?
Actually, you've asked a phenomenal question. Yes. And I think it deserves to be answered. Once again, let me invoke my wife as an example. When I take her to Macy's on Fifth Avenue, she spends 3 hours deciding between Tommy Hilfiger and Calvin Klein or whatever else brand there is out there. If there are 25 credit rating agencies, Yohji Yamamoto and Calvin Klein, and the patient is harboring a malignancy and deciding, should I go here, should I go here, should I go here, should I go here? I don't think that's very good patient care. Obfuscating them with a paradox of choice, this trite word that has been used so often that it's been devalued, that it's assumed axiomatically to be good, isn't very good either. Choice, 20, and when it comes to credit rating agencies for physicians, how do you think they're going to advertise? They're going to advertise by saying, our rating agency, 50% of physicians fail the first time. That's how good we are. They're not going to say to the customer, the consumer, our credit agency certifies every board-certified doctor first time. They're going to say that it's really difficult. And God forbid, if anyone ever wants to move to Philadelphia for an employment from Los Angeles, they'll then move to Penn, and they have to then sit Penn's certifying exam because there is no single board certification now. Every unit is going to do its own. And from an economic point of view, that's information dilution, and that has costs. Uncertainty has costs. Monopoly of information reduces those costs.
The joke is, however, there are 168 different certificates under the ABMS and the 24 affiliates with pass rates of of 74% to 93%. So they're not equal. So it's a bit of a joke to say the monopoly is even doing anything. Do we need it at all? We went to school, we've struggled, we were at the top of our class, we're still at the top of our class, we're working hard for the patients. Who cares about the bureaucrats? They're telling us to do this, that, the other thing. They're measuring our outcomes on our electronic medical records. What more do we need to spend to have the bureaucracy happy?
Well, they want their cut.
Okay.
Then they're getting it.
Okay, next question, sir.
20 seconds of background and then a 20-second question. So I'm 51. I board certified in internal medicine, pulmonary medicine, and critical care medicine 20 years ago. 10 years ago, I went through MOC and recertified over a 5-year period in those same 3 disciplines. And then this past summer, I started the process for the 3rd time. I passed internal medicine, and I will never take those tests ever again. They are insane. The whole process is insane, and I would love to, I could talk for an hour about it. No, wait, we don't have time for applause. But when I'm done with my question, when this is all over, I'd love to talk to any students who'd like to hear a little more detail off in a corner somewhere. So that's just my background. The question is, you said that you recognize that MOC doesn't make you a better doctor, as I painfully know, and so do most of my colleagues. You do it anyways to get the good jobs, and that's the cage we've been put in, or the cage we've allowed to be put around ourselves. But why does that have to be? Why can't we break out of our cage? Why do doctors have to be so passive and accept the status quo? Why should the best internal emergency medicine room jobs that you could get rely on your having that little piece of paper? Why don't we all speak up and say this kind of process is false, and they could learn to evaluate doctors on other criteria than this trumped-up system? Well, why do we have to stay in the cage?
You can get out of the cage. You have to take the leap and walk away from the third-party payer system. You have to go to a cash practice where you restore the relationship between you and your patients and keep the third parties and the bureaucrats out of the room.
Well, but if you work in an ER and you're working for the hospital...
Well, I have a somewhat different situation, but the vast majority of physicians who are not hospital-based can do that.
60% are hospital-based now.
Yeah.
In terms of...
Okay, question. Do we have a student?
Employees. You know,
But that's not hospital.
Okay, we got a student here. Excellent. Here comes the microphone.
Dr. John, so your initial argument was talking about finding the bad apples, and you admitted that there probably aren't that many, but we want to find them when there are. You know, the one out of 10. So, one outcome we can look at is for all the money that is spent on certification, how many bad apples do we actually catch, and kind of what's the unit price of that, right? Is it like $1 million per bad apple, $500,000 per apple? I think that would really help us to think logically about the analysis here. How much does it cost per unit of bad apple? And I'd be willing, so we need to know the cost to determine whether if that's something that we're willing to spend. So do you have that kind of information? Does anyone have that information? How much cost per bad apple?
That's an excellent question for a lot of different areas within medicine. You're taking boards, and the PE part of the board, in other words, the part where you go into that patient encounter room, and you've got to perform in there, and it's rated, right? Well, that came out of the model that was used in Canada, and in Canada, it was like 1 or 2% of the people flunked that PE. But what the public was demanding was, we see that you guys are extremely bright in medical school. You did a great job, but can you actually apply what you know to that interaction with the patient, and can you do it in a professional way so that we feel the trust between us and you? Will you wash your hands? Will you listen to me? Will you look at me? Will you hear me when I speak? And that was the way it started. And the number of students that flunked that is what, 1%, 1.8, 2%? So the question is that getting rid of the bad apples? Well, the interesting thing is actually the medical schools were not flunking those students out of the schools, and they were getting into the system. The question is, what is the N where the cost makes sense? Well, the attempts that happen for these purposes typically start way over here, where you get everybody and you say, we're going to look at everybody's under dilated pupils to see what their eyes look like no matter what. And then you start saying, you know what, there really aren't that many, and then we start swinging back. Bottom line is, this is absolutely evolving. This is absolutely changing on a regular basis. As things change and as things go, I agree. Somebody who's doing critical care medicine, sitting for a general internal medicine board, to me, I don't quite get that. And the information in that board sounds a little bit like, I'm really not there. Now, does some of it relate? Yeah, maybe. But in all reality, it's the practice. And we need to look at this on a regular basis, reevaluate it on a regular basis, and change it till it becomes somewhat functional. But one of the things you also have to realize is this is also, I don't believe it's just the ABMS or whomever is the keeper of these tests. I believe it's also the public, and through the public to the state boards of medical examiners, through the attorneys general, through the other people who say there are screw-ups, as Dr. Jha said. The New York Times writes it, or the Washington Post writes about a doctor that did this. We would demand that this never happens again. Regardless of who and why it was done.
I disagree with that. I don't think the public cares.
Yeah.
I think that the students who don't look you in the eye become pathologists. And that the impetus for this is coming in order to shift money from the practicing physicians to the boards.
100%. And you sound very much like you're the creator of this Kool-Aid that you're trying to pass. To say that you had a medical
vote at the end of this and say I was.
No, let's stop. Let's get a question.
So I would like to address the gentleman's question about the unit costs, because it's a very important question, and I think you need to understand one thing. Unless you actually have parallel universes, we have different levels of regulation. This is a question, the answer of which no form of regression equation or econometric test will give you the answer. Why? Because you do not know what was prevented. You do not know which case did not occur, which serial killer was deterred from going on a double dose of diamorphine because his partner felt obliged to report his every transgression to the state medical board, and so on and so forth. You don't know that. You will never get the unit cost for that. And that is the point. The point is, and the question of unit cost is pointless. This is a country that quantitatively eases whenever it wishes to. QE1, QE2, QE3. I mean, do we really care about unit costs?
Well, yes.
Let's have a little bit of logical consistency over here. All that is important over here is how many bad physicians does it take to ruin the profession? And I know there's a Latin phrase that says testis unus, testis nullus. One data point, one anecdote is not evidence. Multiplicity of anecdotes is not evidence. But the reality is that for the profession that we're in, with such high degree of visibility, it takes just one.
Dr. Kempen, you have a comment?
Medical student that was...
Actually, I just want to answer one thing. First of all, medical schools in this country have increased class size, have started new medical schools, and there's 30% more students in the first-year class right now than there were 7 or 8 years ago. There have been no increases in the 100,000, not exactly, but 100,000 residency spots. That was brought up earlier. Who pays for the residencies? The government. So your training is dependent upon that funding right now. They have a say in that. And they said, in a couple of instances, that we want different things than what you're putting out. They said it in the quality of the product that's coming out of your medical school. That's one of the reasons why medical school is now looking at students in a different way and saying, on your 3rd and 4th year rotations and in your residencies, we would rather see whether or not you're professional. Everybody gets those evaluations now. Why? Because the public and the government wants to see that. That has changed. Things are not the same.
Dr. Kempen, let Dr. Kempen stop.
The question was, what's the cost to get the bad apple? I've been looking at this. It's been what I've been doing for the last 2 years. The cost of the boards is the same as the cost of the state medical boards. The state medical board in Ohio found 128 bad apples in 2011. None of them were incompetent. The one, he moved off to New York. He had 2 bad cases, but he's still practicing neurosurgery. How many people have the boards found as bad apples? 20% of the test-taking class first time around for anesthesia, for example. Does that do anything? No, they practice anyway. So what's the point of paying for nothing is what the boards is, and you're paying twice and the boards are doing nothing.
We've gotten a little bit away from recertification. Yes. So we have one last question here. This young woman.
I'm not a doctor. I'm actually a criminal defense attorney, and no one here's in trouble, I swear. My question, particularly for the two gentlemen who are opposed, is Pennsylvania and particularly Philadelphia has a really horrific case of a bad apple very recently. Kermit Gosnell, who Pennsylvania and particularly Philadelphia has had a horrible case of a bad apple, particularly Kermit Gosnell, and the state board failed to catch him. Medical malpractice failed to catch him for decades, and he may have killed 10 people. He's certainly responsible for at least 2 ladies' deaths. What would either of you do then to see that this is prevented, if not through either further regulatory prohibitions or considerations, but to actually help stop other people like Kermit Gosnell who prey really on society's most vulnerable people?
That's an excellent question. Maintenance of certification would not have stopped Kermit Gosnell. So that just doesn't help. You know, what might help was requiring someone like that to have hospital privileges if he's going to be doing surgeries off-site, because I think if he had been required by law to have nearby hospital privileges, then he would have had to take care of his complications and would have come back to the hospital, and then the hospital would have kicked him off staff, and then people would have become aware of it. But maintenance certification would not have helped.
So he's asking for more regulations.
Okay,
so that the outpatient facility that he was working in was more regulated and would not have been, as difficult.
No, sir, you can't.
We care about what this is doing to our profession. As a person who has practiced all these years, I kind of wondered why we had organic chemistry, electrical physics.
Stop.
Yes.
Herb, please.
Dean, you should be concerned about this. There's a lot of concern.
Herb, please.
I'm concerned
Please.
about a lot of things.
Please.
Absolutely.
Let's let this. We have one more student question up on
Get
top.
rid of that. Get rid of it.
One more student question.
Right up there.
Right up there.
Can you shout loud?
Yeah, they won't hear this. So, I guess I feel like a lot of the medical malpractice cases, I feel like that's sort of unrelated. That's negligence. But I think that there are many cases of doctors, especially who aren't practicing in academic centers and maybe aren't doing as many CMEs, who might not be as up to date on the current guidelines. And for example, that all of their diabetic patients should be on an ACE inhibitor. And how, if we don't have this sort of recertification, how can you ensure that there is this standard of care across all of the medical profession? And I think you would say patients don't care about this, but that's because they don't know to care. They're not going to ask their doctor, am I on the standard of care for diabetes? They're not going to know, and I think that is something.
I think you've got being a medical student, you have a distorted perspective about academic versus community practice. And in point of fact, community practitioners do work very hard to keep up. And that knowledge from academia does diffuse out to outer bumfuck. And
don't go there.
Sorry, couldn't resist. The flip side of that is that the latest and greatest in the academic center is not always what's best for the patient, and that the later adopters may turn out to actually practice better medicine than early adopters of bad therapies.
One of the things I'd say is it's interesting that with the proliferation of schools, if you look at where the osteopathic medical schools have gone into existence over the past several years, there's now 7 osteopathic schools in Appalachia. If you look at where the newer schools are, they're in Harrogate, Tennessee, Yakima, Washington, nowhere near Spokane or anywhere else, Lebanon, Oregon, not Portland, Harlem, New York, so Hattiesburg, Mississippi, Dothan, Alabama, and others. When we look at Appalachia and the 7 osteopathic medical schools in that area, you see that there aren't all that many, if any, allopathic new schools there. It's an interesting thing to look at.
The student's question was an excellent one. Malpractice does lift the standard of care because when a patient dies, a young patient, for example, there will be an army of attorneys on top of that saying the doctor should have used this more advanced treatment or this more advanced approach. But there are many stresses on doctors in addition to malpractice. There's the medical board, there are hospitals, there are insurance companies, and I'm telling you, doctors have a short enough lifespan as it is. You don't need the additional stress of maintenance of certification.
On that note, we're going to end. I would just, we're not going to vote who won. What I would like you to do is, if your mind has been changed, raise your hand. Good, then that's a good discussion according to Harold Shapiro. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for coming very much.